about tackling something called poverty, and I am particularly interested in the social economic benefits of environmental issues. That's my passion, that's where I come from. So I'm the people element, if you want to call it that way. Foods is something that we all need to survive and live with. Unfortunately, I've picked up some stats for you. Fortunately, 9% of people in Wales live with poor food security, which I was quite shocked about. I didn't know that. That's from the Food Standards Agency, picked up this morning from the National Assembly, which I thought was quite a shocking revelation. 1/5 worry about running out of food. In the past 12 months, 14% of people in Wales had run out of food. Isn't that shocking? So I'm here to learn from you. What can we do? I just wanted to throw that in the air and introduce our speakers. And we've got one of them here, Stephen. Do you want to set this up? Some ideas that you want to share? That was me, that was my piece. We can go around because we're a relatively small group. Are you Mike? You look like Mike. Welcome, Mike. Sorry, I wasn't in the morning session. I don't know what you addressed the morning session, but I was in the morning session. You're Philip. Thank you, Philip. Anybody else? There you're here. Excellent. So
We're all here.
you're all here. We don't have a laptop. We're sorting out the temperature in this room, but please help me share some of your ideas. Shall we start with you for 5 minutes each? Give us a flavour of some of the issues that are for you really important.
Okay, yeah, I think for those that were in the main session this morning, I probably touched on most of where I'm coming from in terms of how you can link some of these issues back together, and that we all eat food, and as part of that, there's a process before it that gets the food from sort of the field into the shops. We don't always eat all of our food. The supermarkets don't always sell all of their food. The food producers don't always produce the food without some form of waste. And we know we can minimise all the way down through that process. But we're always going to, as far as I can see, we're always going to generate some form of organic waste from that. It's how we make the best use of it, and say close that circle. And one of the things, and I guess you can do it on a very small scale at home or within a community. And I was talking to Robin, who's with Oak Heath, I think it is, school earlier on, and talking about engagement with children. And the sort of starting place is the soil. And without the soil, we're not going to have any food in the first place. So how do we protect our soil resource? At a European level, there is a soil resource strategy and how we protect it. How can we do something about that? Well, if some of that food that you don't manage to eat at home, you could turn into compost, for example. And some of you may do that already, or you may buy some compost in that's made from that type of material. And one of the benefits of putting that organic material back onto soil is that it helps to improve its quality in a number of ways. One, when we have wet months, it helps to actually keep the soil free draining by improving its structure. And then conversely, when we have dry months, because it's got higher levels of organic matter, it helps hold some of that moisture in so we don't get degradation of the soil. The other bit it has is nutrients, and 3 of the key plant nutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. Without those, plants don't grow. And most of those fertilisers, be it using sort of in gardens or on the large agricultural scale, most of that comes from inorganic resources. So sort of nitrate-based fertilisers coming from sort of the oil side, phosphorus-based fertilisers being stripped out of the ground. It's a non-renewable resource, potassium, etc. as well. So you've got these non-renewable resources that actually, if we use that organic material that we've wasted, turned into compost, and put back on the soil, you are then helping benefit that soil, you're helping protect that soil and actually make it better for growing things. So that's sort of on a very small scale how we can close that loop with taking that bio-based economy, that sort of food waste, and using it in some beneficial way. And what I was talking about earlier on was just doing that in a much bigger way and using a slightly different technology in terms of anaerobic digestion. And not only do you get that organic output that you can put back to land, but you get that gas that you can refine and do different things with it, and you can start creating all these other materials from it. And I think one of the key ones I didn't really talk about a lot earlier was plastic. And I think we've all seen the issue with plastic at the moment. The industry's been talking about it for a long time, but it's really come to light over the last few months with things like the plastic whale with Blue Planet and David Attenborough, etc., suddenly raising it into sort of government prominence, and things like the deposit return scheme being discussed for plastics, etc. Well, there's a whole thing there. Yes, we need plastics, but actually you can start to turn to bio-based plastics, and they're made out of natural resources, so we can still have plastic, they're just a bioplastic rather than the fossil fuel-based plastic, and the bio ones actually, when they're finished being used, can either be reused or recycled, or actually will degrade completely and won't leave these microplastics because they're coming from a natural resource. So again, it's a way of, yes, we need some of these things, but we can actually be innovative and replace them with something else, and using some of this disruptive technology now allows us to do that. So that's sort of where I'm coming from in terms of using that waste we're creating. I know I'm using the term waste, and that's because it's been discarded by us, so under sort of the European definitions that we have to sort of all abide by, if we've discarded it, we've created a waste. Doesn't have to mean it stays a waste. We can do something really good with that to turn it into something useful. So it's really, we can do all these different things, but it doesn't have to be on this big scale. We can actually all do things at home as well, which help with that.
So small actions, is that?
You can take small steps,
Small
yeah.
steps. Do any of you have any questions before we pass on to the next speaker to encourage some debate? Any questions that you wanted to ask?
Can I ask about the cost of some of these alternatives to plastic? At the moment, I suppose plastic is very cheap to manufacture. What about the plant-based materials?
They're not a lot. They are a bit more expensive,
Yeah.
but again, as the sort of the economies of scale, as they can produce more, that cost will fall. And I think again, this comes down to actually, if we're going to look at taxation on, do we look at a form of taxation where it's taken from a virgin resource? Should that be taxed to make it a higher price than actually taking it from a recycled one? There are different ways of incentivising the sort of sector to do that, to sort of make it switch on to something that's actually more sustainable and doesn't have to cost a lot more. That sort of taking that virgin resource isn't looked at properly, and then all this issue of, well, we've caused a huge problem with creating the waste from the plastic, and where are we passing that issue to then sort of cause cleanup? So they've not taken that whole life cycle into account. If you did, the cost of virgin plastic would be extremely high. I know it's not there at the moment, but bioplastics don't have to be much more expensive.
That's a really, really important question around cost, because if we are trying to change behaviour, I think motivating people that are on the binge of a low income, which is where I come from, don't have a lot of money, and we want them to actually buy it. And knowing that we need to incentivise them to actually buy it is to bring down cost. I think that's a really important question. Any other observations, questions before we move on?
Back to the cost question. I think sometimes we look at it from the wrong perspective when you're thinking about attitudinal change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the only reason there's a cost issue is that that's so cheap to make.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that the discussion on waste needs to actually go back some steps to a point of why is it there in the first place? And the question is answered not necessarily with plastic cups, but with a lot of waste packaging. It comes down to two things: one, transport, and two, display. And both of those things are driven by major organisations globally. If you've ever tried to unpack a Barbie doll, case in point, it's packaged in a way that it can be multi-packed in palleted containers to be shipped around the world.
Yep.
It's micro-packaged in such a way that that doll stays exactly where it is the day it was put in the box after it's travelled all the way around the world, so it sits on the Toys R Us or wherever it is shelf, and it doesn't matter how it gets thrown around, it will always look the same. And to do that, if you've ever unpacked a Barbie doll, you will realise it produces a massive amount of waste, and a lot of it isn't reusable.
Right.
So if you take that argument, go right back to cost again, back to the beginning, how much does that Barbie doll cost? How much does it cost when you put all the package and distribution costs on top of it? So if you go back to our parents' generation or grandparents' generation, if you bought that doll, it didn't come in any packaging. It would probably have come in a big box with lots of dolls, put in a paper bag and given to our grandparents. So,
What an easy life. I'm just thinking of all the unpacking that I have to do every time it's Christmas.
and I'll just use that as an example.
Yeah.
But just go
No,
back.
it's a really good
And the
point.
reason these are cheap is because there's a worldwide demand for them. The machine that makes that cup probably costs about £500,000. But somebody presses a button and knocks out thousands and thousands of those every minute. And then they become cheap. And they're sold on a cost which
I think, yeah. And I think part of the challenge is that, that's driven, it's fossil-based plastic comes from the oil industry. The oil industry has such a huge impact.
Absolutely.
That's effectively a byproduct for them. It's not the key part that they want. So that it then gets used in other places. So actually, it's about breaking some of that stranglehold. And I know that some of the large, that they're sort of trying to move into, say, we're energy companies now, not oil companies, because they're realising there is a change. But I think the only way you get that change, and we've seen, the court-hold agreements, etc., I think they're ineffective. They're voluntary. They won't really have a big impact because the big companies volunteer for them, and they'll only do it when it self-serves. So the only way you can really have some form of disruptive change to get things going is to say, we're going to legislate in some way, be it a recycling target that's mandatory, or we're going to have electric cars by this date, that creates, encourages us to have a change, because otherwise the companies won't change unless there is a requirement for them to do so, because they are not there. Generally, I'm not going to, most companies are there to make a profit for shareholders or institutions, which we benefit from in some way, be it through pensions or something. They're not there necessarily to change, make the world a better place and do things in a more sustainable way.
What
That's
is
not
their
for all
motivation?
companies. Yeah.
And I would challenge one of your phrases, and the only phrase I would challenge is cheap. Because what is the real cost?
Well, yes.
And the question is not what it costs to acquire something. The question is what it costs from the moment of inception all the way through to the fact it doesn't exist anymore. And unfortunately, as a whole society, we now don't cost things we have the ability to do whole life costing on anything and everything. We choose not to. A lot of the time, this is convenient. It's convenient to all of us. Even though we know it's not necessarily the right thing to do, we make a convenience of choosing to do it when it meets our moral standards or our ethical response. And we also have the convenience of ignoring it when it's not so easy to come up with an answer. There is an answer to that. Paper cups have been but not that type of paper cup. We used to have paper cups when we had kids as a party, and after 2 drinks they'd go soggy. So we used to have paper straws. Right? Okay, and those worked, and they were the main things that we bought for maybe 40 years plus. Right? And then all of a sudden plastics become so easier, don't they? They don't go soggy. When you're sucking your school milk out through the plastic straw, it doesn't. Remember school milk before Thatcher the milk standard? You used to be able to get the straw with it, the paper straw, and you never got to the bottom of the milk with it, but
Never saw the home for you either.
So, it does matter about perception. Yes. Okay, we can look at these as being perceived as cheap, but the real cost is far greater than we ever appreciate. And that's in many ways about how we have to re-educate ourselves and society at large as to what is the real cost. And that we do have personal choices, like do we compost ourselves? So you've got individual moral duties, let's call them that. Okay, because if you're aware, you have a greater moral duty than if you're not aware. That's a fact. Whether you like it or not is irrelevant. So what we have to do is consider how we educate people properly, how we give them proper choices, informed choices, so that they make the best choice available to them. Now, a lot of the time, we get advertised at by all these major companies, and even how they present stuff in all this packaging is a form of advertising. Okay? Now then, the food industry will argue that there's less spoilage of food because of the way they package it. That there is some truth in that, and there is some untruth in that. We all appreciate that it could be delivered. We can go to the counter in Tesco's and get them to cut immediately off a joint and take it home in a little small bag, and we don't need to have the big packaged stuff which we just take off the shelf and don't spend any time waiting for. So we need to really train ourselves. How do we shop? Even in supermarkets, even in the multiples, you have choice. But we have to exercise it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so there's a lot of choices and things. One of the things that we're particularly interested in at the moment is about thinking about where waste happens, especially in the food chain. Now, one of the things that hasn't been mentioned is all the way through the food chain. One of the biggest waste systems is water. Water, actually, in the food chain, is a major issue, and going to become a much more of a major issue as we go forward in time. We are getting to a situation where the potential for the world to grow enough food in the traditional manners that it has done over years is becoming less viable. If we continue doing the same thing on open farms, with product that becomes infected by natural causes, and is irrigated by our traditional means, we're going to have more and more problems. Because we grow it in a field, we cover the field with water to feed the things. We then harvest it and we wash the stuff with water. We then process it with water. We then cook it with water. We then dispose of it with water. And so there's different challenges going to come up, and water, as far as the food cycle is concerned, is going to be a major issue for us. And I haven't got any answers for this. I'm just saying this is something that we need to be considering as part of the cycle of all where the food is and how it ends up. Even to process the waste in the ways that Steve is describing, we need water, right?
Okay.
So there's a big issue here that we need to consider about the whole economy of how we're doing things and the economy of scales and where we came. I'm working with a gentleman who's present here on an alternative farming system, which probably will overcome some of those water issues, hopefully will. But we don't have all the answers to these issues, and these are challenges where I would say, if you can come up with answers to some of these things, these are where we're looking at answers. Seaweed, what is it? Seaweed, yeah.
I was just going to stop you there, just for a second, Does anybody have any answers? Seaweed? Oh, okay, whoa, great, go.
Well, it's not like one of my answers. I just read that they're looking at microbial fuel cells.
Right, okay.
You use biochar and you put urine in and you get electricity and clean water out. But that's not, I just read about that. I'm not doing that. That's not my thing. I didn't come up with
Reading
that.
about something that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Good enough. Anybody else?
Oh,
Even if you just read about
Interestingly
it.
enough, I'm working with some people at the minute looking at vertical farming.
Okay.
So basically you stack the food, introduce the nutrients from the top, feed it through and recycle it. I'm heavily involved in, when I say heavily involved, I'm involved with people that grow tomatoes, for example. I'm involved with an offshoot of Swansea University who are involved with biological pesticides using parasitic intervention. So there are answers, but there needs to be the appetite to deal with them. A lot of it is consumer orientated, and I could be quite controversial here, which I will be.
Go.
Reason I'm interested in environmental engineering, I'm an engineer by trade,
Okay.
is 40 odd years ago I was diving in Yugoslavia. I'm a diver. And I came across a patch of the ocean full of plastic cups, absolutely littered. I swear the boat stopped, had their sliver ledge and chucked it overboard. There was 3 foot of plastic cups on the bottom of the water. And it was just, it horrified me. I was absolutely appalled. And in later life, that drove me to look at ways of dealing with waste at source, because at that age, I thought, well, I'm not going to get rid of plastic cups. I love plastic. I think it's revolutionary. It's about as revolutionary as Sir Joseph Whitworth, who I think was probably the greatest philanthropist this country's seen. He didn't believe in patents. He shared knowledge because he thought knowledge would empower people. So I got involved in plastic and recycling, what have you. And I had a theory of homogeneous delivery of foodstuffs. So in a McDonald's restaurant, you would have a homogeneous offering. The tray, the box, the lid, the straw, everything, the cup, the napkin would all be polystyrene. McDonald's were very interested. We got so close to converting, dealing with waste on site, because a homogeneous waste stream dealt with logistics and segregation. Sadly, misinformation. Suddenly, the Boy Scouts of America decided that plastic is evil, it goes into the ground and doesn't change for a million years. Well, it doesn't, which is quite good, because when you put these so-called paper cups into the ground, they create methane. and they leach other acids and alkalis. At the time, McDonald's backed out of a homogeneous waste stream very quickly. They had a very fast alternative, and the alternative was that their main suppliers, such as Huntsman Van Leer, also manufactured paper. So it was no problem to them. They could offer paper, which incidentally was plastic lined and wax lined. So it's a very complex issue, and you get into life cycle analysis. As an environmentalist, I would say that I should always drink from a polystyrene cup. Not my choice, because I prefer to drink my beer out of a glass mug or my glass of wine out of glass because it's tactile, it's better. But if I look at a coffee cup and I use a coffee mug, 3 kilowatts of energy to make it. Every time I use it, I'm boiling using energy potable water. I'm then using detergents and tablets that will end up in the water table. It's an environmental nightmare. When I consider the polystyrene cup that uses 0.004 of watt of energy to produce it, I should really be choosing this polystyrene cup. My choice, which may be negligent, is to use the mug, even though I boil 3 kilowatt kettle to fill it and boil water to wash it. So it's a very complex issue, life cycle analysis, and you can get knee-jerk reactions. Personally, I think the future is bioplastic. But, as people say, the past is a memory, the future is a dream, reality is now. And what we've got to deal with is now, and deal with all the crap that's in the world right now, and we need the solutions to that. I've said enough now.
Any solutions to the crap in the world?
Yeah, I think that it's about taking as many feasible steps as you can.
Okay, step one. Any step?
For example, there's something called algae, which probably everybody knows about, that loves wastewater, consumes carbon dioxide, produces foodstuff or other chemicals as a byproduct of its activity. So connecting algae production units up to wastewater treatment works or to power stations is a great way of using existing technology but actually utilising that, locking the carbon into something that's more useful without polluting the atmosphere or dumping the wastewater into something else that's generating more energy in order to clean the water. So some of these things are emerging already.
So what I'm getting is that from this room, is that actually from the comments that we had earlier about marijuana, about when some of you were here and some of you weren't, is that there are things out there that are being seen as small steps that you could use to actually sort out some of this waste that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And is it about collecting intelligence? Is it about sharing that intelligence? Because outside this room, having been in the assembly this morning, we were definitely not having this conversation.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the knowledge is there already.
Okay.
I think, this morning there was quite a lot of discussion about, yes, we've got the Future Wellbeing Act and all of that, but how is it actually going to be implemented? Where are the drivers? And I think here in Wales we've got a lot of political support for some of these solutions, and there's kind of pockets of support for SMEs like ourselves. Should probably give a bit of background that the introduction to seaweed and algae was probably quite a good lead into what we're doing.
Okay, what do you do?
So Green Seas is a company based in Pembrokeshire that is looking at seaweeds holistically, really. On one side from an environmental management perspective, and the first project we're doing is all about harvesting seaweed blooms from the Milford Haven waterway that are there because of all the agricultural runoff of all the fertiliser. And we're harvesting that, taking some of the nitrates out, and then producing a fertiliser, soil enhancer, biostimulant product from that. There were a number of different kind of questions and potential solutions that were discussed there. Seaweed and algae have a lot of the answers. The the kind of bio-based plastics, alginate from brown seaweeds. There's been a lot of work looking at producing plastics from that. Pharmaceuticals, there's an endless list. So I think, and at European level, millions and millions has been spent over the last decade looking at those opportunities, but it's not really translated commercially yet. So I guess the question sitting through the sessions this morning was, yeah, I still don't think we've got those drivers and levers right for transferring all that knowledge and experience into viable commercial
solutions.
The only way to do it quickly is to create commercial. If somebody's not going to make money out of it, then it isn't going to happen in any time frame of relevance. So what needs to happen is there needs to be commercial activities that can make money, that will drive investment and get these things to scale. And what the political side of things needs to do is make sure that the regulatory framework is there to encourage that business model,
so
to move away from old business models to new.
Freedom to go out and test, freedom to go out and explore and expand.
Changes to regulatory guidelines can have a huge influence. I come from the lighting industry.
Okay.
And
What changes in the regulatory framework? Because there's different types of.
So I'll just explain from a lighting industry perspective. Changes just simply raising the energy performance limits across Europe for light bulbs.
Okay.
Ruled out light bulbs that have been around for the last 100 years, which is incandescent light bulb. But it also provided a huge opportunity for hundreds of billions of dollars of investment to become realised, R&D investment to become realised into LED lighting. So that simple change in one regulation drove a whole industry to improve. Now it's the same sort of thing.
Particular regulation actually.
Yeah.
I remember
And you can apply that kind of approach across all sectors. Like, talking about life cycle analysis and looking at the overall cost of products like plastic cups. If you actually put something in legislation, put some kind of taxing element to that, straight away, these kind of new potential things can compete.
One of the strongest fiscal incentives we had within the UK was the introduction of the landfill tax. And how low landfill cost was, say 15 to 20 pounds a tonne just to get it in the ground, and then the additional addition of the tax, it's over £100 a tonne now because of the addition of the tax. So again, a very simple, quite a blunt measure that drove quite a lot of behaviour change. And what it should have done it should have been higher earlier, because it would have, of course, more opportunity for new technologies to come into play. It was kept too low for too long. So very simple. If you put it in the right way, it can do it. And I guess the others, as you say, the things like some of the larger waste companies. If you look at the infrastructure they've developed, it's been backed typically by long-term contracts from local authorities. So you've got infrastructure that's in place that needs to be there for a certain amount of time, and having a stable regulatory regime is hugely important. One of the things we saw, the introduction of the landfill allowance trading scheme, which was to encourage local authorities not to put waste into landfill, and it had to minimize because they were going to get penalised for it. Government changed and it was taken away, yet overnight, and we'd had billions of pounds worth of investment into new infrastructure and long-term contracts aimed at meeting that particular regulation, but those contracts are now being terminated, or that equipment is a white elephant, or it's a huge cost to you and me as the taxpayer doing that. So if, things like the Lancashire PFI contract, a £2 billion contract terminated, and that's cost the taxpayer. The Manchester contract, £2.5 billion contract, terminated because of this, cost us as the taxpayer. So you need that very stable regime so it doesn't change when we make a wrong investment. And hopefully things like the circular economy package coming out of Europe will help create some of that sort of framework.
I guess the question mark in my head is whether Welsh Government, Welsh Assembly have the powers to put that legislation in place that I think it is needed to provide that driver.
I think under the current, I think they can. Same as Scotland have done. They're now introducing the landfill ban, so no organic waste will go to landfill in 2021. So,
but I mean across other sectors as well, because certainly with energy, they don't currently have the powers to do that.
Can I just take it back to the Future of Wellbeing Generations Act? Do you see the Act itself, which was get through that stage. Do you see that being an enabler?
I think it should be.
Okay. And you can have another discussion, we won't tell the rest of that.
I think it's taking a while for kind of tangible kind of changes to legislation and things to catch up, and I think this is the time now to be saying, look, we've got this in place now, let's see it forcing other change within the legislation in Wales. I think my only experience of it so far is it's used quite a lot in assessment of grant funding bids, but it almost feels a little bit like a tick box exercise.
Yeah. Is
Is
that the feeling? Can we have an honest discussion there? Is that the feeling? I mean, Sophie's going to go. Sophie's a brilliant inspirational speaker, actually, and she's going to talk about it in a bit more detail.
I think that from the perspective of, be careful what I say now because if it was not paid wages, but from the perspective of someone who's worked in local government for 17 years and seen loads of stuff like this happen over the time, I think there's a suspicion, an element of what you're saying is right. And I would imagine there's a lot of people sitting in the audience upstairs that really don't know what it's about. Might even be the first time they've heard about it today.
Okay.
Because but it's been with us in local government for a long time. And you're right about the grants.
What's your role in local government? Do you mind telling us? What's your role in local government? What do you do?
Well, I used to work for Ceredigion County Council.
Okay.
I now work for the City DLT.
Okay. Okay, that's quite telling. That's really
So,
interesting.
but it's like any form of legislation is only any good if it's got any teeth.
Okay.
And the only time it ever works is if the teeth bite.
Because it kind of isn't exactly what you were talking about, Mark, is it? The future generations. It's not exactly. It doesn't have that kind of bite into it. It doesn't have a
Hasn't
circular
yet.
economy.
Hasn't
Exactly.
yet.
It hasn't
But
yet.
you see, when you take the grant application idea, which is, you're right, and nearly everything now goes back to 5 ways of working and wellbeing legislation. So you fill your boxes, you put down the answers that you think are right. Nobody knows what the right answers are, but usually the answer that you put down is the one you think the funder is looking for. So you fill your form out and you do that, and hopefully you get your money.
Is it telling?
But the only time it's really going to make any difference from that perspective is when somebody turns around and says, at the end of your project, you didn't do that. You've got to give us that money back.
Yes.
Does that
That's
happen?
when the wake-up call comes in.
Does that happen?
Politically, it's never a good thing.
But you'd hope that, I guess, those key things set out in the Act would have been used to design the funding programmes in the first place. But
Well, it should be applied to funding programmes that are coherent with the ambitions of the Act, not funding that's got nothing to do with, it's not just adding on as a bolt-on because Welsh Government feel they've got to do it. It has to be relevant as well, otherwise it becomes a mockery.
it should be right up there strategically.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I think it's a good thing.
I don't think anybody can disagree
I think
with
it's
it. I
a
think
good
the
step.
sentiment is.
And it goes back to the last presentation, the last one that talks about knowledge. Because I'm starting to think like an old person. And it's a bit frightening. A 19-year-old daughter who doesn't really understand sometimes the way I think. Just like I didn't understand the way my parents thought.
My 5-year-old doesn't understand the way I think because she's only 5.
But if you look at it from a slightly different perspective, and I'll talk about probably the older of those of us that are here, our parents, and possibly your grandparents, their social networking, I don't want to be sexist about this, but how it was back then, your mother's social networking was walking downtown and meeting her friends. And while she walked downtown, she took a basket with her. And she bought what she could afford or could buy because she might have been on rationing. And she only took back what she could consume because they couldn't afford to have waste.
They didn't have refrigeration either.
They didn't have refrigeration and they didn't have a car.